Hi and welcome to Abraz Around the House. Today I'm going to be going over a project that I've been working on that I finally completed, that was to create a base for my 1960s era drill press that I refurbished a few episodes back and needed a home for it, along with possibly some storage and a couple other tools if I could squeeze it onto that spot. Needed to find a place for it here in the workshop, which I did. As you can see, it's right here behind me. Today I'm going to walk you through the process of taking that cabinet, which I found at Habitat for Humanity for a few bucks, and knew I was going to have to beef it up a bit and make it substantial enough to hold this pretty hefty drill press. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Abraz Around the House. Well, this is my starting point, and as you can see, I paid about $20 for this, and I like the fact that it has 4 drawers, about the right height, gives me a good kind of base to start with, and don't have to make the drawers or buy the drawer hardware. First step was to add some 2x2s to the top, and the idea here is just to have something to attach the solid wood top to. Nothing fancy, just these 2x2s with some glue and some screws, and that'll be the first step of this process. I've been looking for an excuse to use this handheld planer, and I was able to use it here. This little lip that all cabinets have to help make adjustments was removed. And I just measured out using some birch plywood is what I'm going to use to wrap this thing with, was my next step. Cutting that out so I can prepare to attach that to the cabinet. And here I'm using the Kreg Foreman to create my pocket holes to put this together. Using the Foreman to create the pocket holes for the sides to attach to the back, and also to attach it to the top. So here's an example of a little brain fart while you're working, and this will happen at least once or twice in a project, I find, at least for myself, and it's just a matter of trying to figure out ways to fix it. Luckily in this case, wasn't so big that I couldn't work it out. You see that I put this panel on backwards, so luckily I hadn't cut out the other one yet, so I was able to just set this one aside for the other side, and then recut the pocket holes the correct way for this side, and then reattach it, and all is good. Here's one of those funny but not funny situations. I left the Festool sander on and plugged it up, and like wrangling a grease pig. You don't want to do that too many times with a Festool sander, if you know what I mean. You see, as I threw the disc off there, I was a bit disgusted with myself. Well, here's one of my first chances to use my Festool track saw, and I absolutely love this thing already. I can tell it's going to be a big workhorse in my wood shop. Well, here I'm putting on that back piece of birch plywood, and for now I'll just tack it on with some glue and brad nailer, and then flip it over so I can do the screws in these pocket holes. I use the Kreg Foreman for this, these pocket holes, and I really like that tool, and probably do a video on that later. The bottom of this is going to need to be pretty beefed up, so I'm using my oscillating tool here to remove some of that particle board, and what I'll do is replace that with 2x4s on the bottom and give it a little bit more strength here on the bottom. Here's some firsts here. I get to use that miter saw on the miter saw stand for the first time in a project, and cuts like butter, does good on dust collection. Real happy with this new miter saw. And here we are with some homemade pocket holes. Here I'm using the Kreg plugs for these holes. I am painting this, so not too worried about those showing. They'll just get covered up with some paint. Punching down all of the brads that put in these during glue up. I'm going with just a general wood filler. We'll sand that down and then paint it. I think you get the idea here, so we'll speed past this boring part. Here I'm just rounding off the edges with a round over on the router. The drawers had some holes from the previous handles, so I knew that the handles I was putting on wasn't going to match up, and so I'm just filling those here with some dowels, and we'll just sand those down and paint them before I put on the new hardware. This is kind of a personal preference thing, but as I'm working on a project, every now and then I like to just do a cleanup. It kind of helps reset me and don't get in too much of a hurry as I move through, because that's one thing I have a tendency to do, is start rushing things, and whenever I have a mess around me, that seems to happen more frequently. So this is my reset. Thrown on my first coat of paint, and at the time it seemed like a good time to do it, but looking back, probably should have just waited until I got that top completely on, made the final step. But got a little ahead of myself here, but that's okay. I decided to use the top of my Husky workbench for this build, and I'll be using the hardware from that Husky workbench for a future workbench outfeed table build, and looking forward to that next project. But this is the piece that I'll be using, at least a portion of this. Watching this in faster speed, just realizing how much my work moves around on me while I'm working on it, whether it be sanding, routing the edge, that type of thing. And I'll be so glad when I get a workbench build done so that I can put a vise on these things, and sure, it'll make things a lot easier. Well, a little moment of truth here as I am working, making sure this thing is centered. And if I would have left it like I started, and that was with that front edge out a little further, I would have saved myself a little bit of extra work. But basically what happened here is I didn't allow enough for the drawer fronts and the handles. So it would have looked odd, the handle sticking out a good 3/4 of an inch beyond the top. So just for aesthetics, I felt like that later on I needed to change this, and you'll see what happens there. Of course, I had the pocket holes that were holding the top on, but also added these extra from the cabinet itself to secure that top even more. So here's where I will be squaring off that front because of the roundover, and I'm going to move about an inch or so from the back side to the front to allow for those drawer handles to fall underneath the top. Here I'm using the Festool Domino, a really beautiful piece of equipment, and does a great job with the mortise and tenon joint. But basically I'm using this to transfer about an inch, 1.25 inch portion of this top to the front, and this will help me align it and keep it straight whenever I go to glue it. So initially I made this a pretty precise fitting. I have a couple of settings on this domino that allows you to give a little bit play in the joint. You can see here I'm pointing to that setting, and I did that so that I could adjust it slightly after I put the glue in and the clamps on. Pretty cool feature. Clarify a little bit on that setting, it does just do that from left to right, not up and down, so you don't lose the alignment in that sense. As far as the thickness, it just will slide slightly a little bit back and forth. That's what I did when I went to glue this up. And here I'm cutting the hole for the Powerstrip that is going to be mounted on the surface of this table, and had to play around with that a little bit just because I didn't want any obstructions, so I had to move it over a little bit, and also wanted to allow for both the drill press and some other tools on top, so had to be pretty selective on location. And so I'm going to plunge cut here with the Festool plunge cutting saw, and that will give me the first 2 cuts that I need before I bring in the jigsaw. Using a little tack rag to get any dust off before I go to apply the stain and the finish. And I'll be using the Danish oil natural stain and wipe on poly for that. I used 3 coats of this wipe on poly for the final finish. Okay, we're getting to the fun part here, just applying the paint. I think I ended up doing a couple of coats of this outdoor satin finish, and then came in behind it with polyurethane, and I ended up doing 3 coats of poly on top of this paint. Sanding with 220 grit sandpaper before I apply the final coat of poly. A little mixed emotions about using these rubber feet. I am using them, but I may come back later with some leveling feet. They're a little bit bigger, and probably would only use 4 of them, and I could level it on the floor as well, so I'll probably change that. Here I'm getting ready to add the caster set to the bottom so that I can move this heavy-duty drill press stand around with that equipment on top, and so I opted for the Rockwell casters. They're rated for much more than this thing weighs. You probably get the idea here, but when you bring these down, they lift the table up. When you disengage them, the table goes down on the rubber feet. Here I'm drilling all of the pilot holes for the equipment that's on top, and I of course had everything up here on top, getting an idea where it would go, and marked all these spots off. The little device you see me using is kind of a alignment tool to keep the drill straight up and down on the surface, and I'll put all the things that I use in the description of this video if you want to take a peek and click on any thing that is interesting to you. Lift with your legs, lift with your legs. This was quite an awkward lift, and probably should have had 2 people on that job, but I was able to get it up there without too much damage. And then of course straightening it up, getting it in line with the pilot holes. And you'll see here that I missed one of the pilot holes, and so had to get that one there after the fact. But just use some lag bolts on this, and I'll be using the same size lag bolts for all of the equipment on top, but just different lengths. I felt this table would be a great table for a benchtop vise and a benchtop grinder, because the weight of the actual bench itself and just creates a real stable environment for something like this. Won't vibrate, and I've already tested that, of course, and works great. And then I added also a vise. Of course, you can always use a vise. Of course, we'll have woodworking vices in the shop, but this one will be good for any kind of metal that I need to work on. Well, with the Powerstrip being on top, I had to shorten all of my cords because I didn't want any cords just kind of bunched up on top there. So I shortened the power to the drill press and the light that goes on the drill press, and then also the grinder, and I had another charger that I added to the corner, which you can see in the reveal. Now to add all of the handles to the drawers, and found a nice little jig for this, and I'll put it in the description below, but it worked great for creating the holes for the drawer handles. Let's see if we can buzz through this really quick. You get the idea. I thought a great addition to this would be a drill press table, so I went ahead and picked one up. This PowerTech is a good little drill press table for the price, and it will give me a little bit more area to work with on the drill press, and also be able to lock down pieces that I need to lock down. Plus it just looks really cool. So cord management is always kind of a deal, and I wanted to just make this come out the back instead of dropping it over the back side. So just a little bit of cord management here using this. I think it's normally used in drywall for like your TV to be able to drop down cables through the wall. And works great for this. Just painted it and push that cord through with a little bit of persuasion. Away. Okay, so here we are finishing it up, and we'll go ahead and get ready to roll the reveal, cue up the music. Thank you for viewing this. We ask that you just like and subscribe, help the channel out, and you have a great day. Thank you so much for viewing this episode, and if you'd like to go back and watch any of the other videos that we've created, there's a lot about this garage and the direction that I'm taking it. I've got a great project coming up that I know you'll find interesting, and it will really help me with the workflow in this garage. It's going to be a workbench that will also have a lot of storage in it and serve a lot of purposes as I move this garage into more of a woodworking shop. So thanks again for viewing. God bless you. You have a great day.